His black wife whispered, "Please don't." In her sleep, the Korean Mafia boss got up and left the house at 4 a.m. Words fell into the darkness like shattered glass. "Please don't." That's all she said. Just those 2 words, hanging in the air of their bedroom at 3:42 a.m. Jin-ho Park froze, his hand hovering over the lamp switch. He'd been about to turn it on, restless and unable to sleep, planning to go down to his office and review the financial reports that his lieutenants had delivered earlier that day. But those 2 words, spoken in a voice thick with terror, stopped him cold. His wife of barely 2 months, was still asleep. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and quick. She was dreaming, and in that dream, something was happening that made her beg. The great Amara Wilson Park, who never begged for anything in waking life, was pleading in her sleep. Something primal and violent unfurled in Jin-ho's chest as he watched her. He was not a man unaccustomed to violence. He had built his empire on carefully calculated ruthlessness. He had ordered men killed over business disputes. He had broken the bones of those who betrayed him without blinking. He had inherited his father's organization at 26 and expanded it across international borders, transforming a street gang into a sophisticated criminal network that commanded respect from Seoul to San Francisco. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. Hardened criminals stuttered in his presence. But watching his wife, this brilliant, fiercely independent woman he'd married in what was supposed to be a mutually beneficial arrangement, flinch away from invisible threats in her sleep, he felt something he had no name for, something that made his hands shake and his jaw clench until his teeth threatened to crack. Amara whimpered again, too quiet for him to hear the words, and a tear slipped from beneath her closed eyelid, trailing down the rich dark skin of her cheek like a silent accusation. Jin-ho pulled his hand back from the lamp, moving with the careful silence he'd perfected in his youth, when being quiet meant surviving his father's drunken rages. He dressed in darkness. Jeans, a black sweater, the shoulder holster with the custom Glock he'd carried since he was 20. Then he walked out of the bedroom, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like an oath. The house was silent at 4 a.m. Their house. Though Amara still called it your place when she spoke to him, as if she were just a temporary guest in these sprawling rooms with their minimalist furniture and priceless Korean art. As if she hadn't become far more important to him than either of them had anticipated. He took the stairs down to the first floor, then kept going, descending into the basement levels where he kept his real office. Not the architecturally perfect space upstairs with its designer furniture and subtle displays of wealth. The one down here, where the walls were soundproofed and the computers held encrypted files that documented every aspect of his organization's activities. His head of security, Min-suk, looked up in surprise when Jin-ho entered the command center. "Boss? It's 4 a.m. "I need everything," Jin-ho said, his voice flat and cold in a way that made Min-suk straighten immediately. "Everything on Amara's ex-fiancé, Darren Caldwell. I want his entire life laid bare." Min-suk's expression shifted from surprise to carefully neutral. He was good at his job, which meant he was good at not asking unnecessary questions when Jin-ho gave an order. "We did the standard background check before the wedding," Min-suk reminded him cautiously. "Clean record, successful investment banker, Harvard MBA." "That was standard," Jin-ho interrupted, his voice quiet in a way that made Min-suk's mouth snap shut. "I want extraordinary. I want everything that doesn't appear in official records. I want to know what he did behind closed doors. I want to know who his friends are, who his enemies are. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what keeps him up at night. I want to know his fears. Understood. Understood." Min-suk was already typing, sending encrypted messages to their network of informants, hackers, and bribed officials. "Can I ask what prompted this?" Jin-ho was silent for a long moment, seeing Amara's face in his mind, that tear tracking down her cheek, the way her body had tensed in unconscious fear. "My wife had a nightmare," he said finally. "I'm going to make sure she never has another one." For hours later, Jin-ho sat alone in his office reading the preliminary reports Min-suk had assembled. With each page, with each email and text message they'd managed to recover, with each statement from former employees and acquaintances. The cold fury in his chest grew sharper and more focused. Amara had been engaged to Darren Caldwell for 18 months. She'd broken it off 10 months ago. Their relationship had looked picture-perfect from the outside. Power couple featured in business magazines, she a rising star in architectural design, he a successful investment banker with political aspirations. But behind the carefully cultivated image lay a different story. The engagement had ended 6 weeks before Jean Ho's business associate, Marcus Wilson, had suggested an arrangement. Marcus's daughter, Amara, needed protection and a fresh start. Jean Ho needed a wife to satisfy his grandmother's endless nagging about continuing the family line and to present a more respectable image to the legitimate business partners he was cultivating. It was supposed to be simple, a business arrangement, a marriage on paper that would benefit both parties. But Jean Ho hadn't counted on Amara walking into his office for their first meeting, looking at him with those piercing dark eyes, nervous but unwavering. He hadn't counted on the way she challenged him when most people cowered, asking pointed questions about his business, refusing to pretend she didn't know exactly what he was. He hadn't counted on finding her in his kitchen at midnight, unable to sleep, and ending up talking with her until dawn about everything from Korean poetry to West African architecture. He definitely hadn't counted on falling in love with her. The file in front of him told a story that made him want to tear the world apart with his bare hands. Darren Caldwell, respected businessman, philanthropist, and future political candidate, was a monster who hid behind his charming smile and community service. There were emails in which he'd threatened to ruin Amara's career when she questioned his controlling behavior. Text messages in which he'd apologized profusely after destroying a design she'd spent months creating, claiming he'd just lost control for a moment. Financial records showing how he'd systematically isolated her, offering to manage her finances, then restricting her access to her own money. There were photos. Jean Ho made himself look at each one, committing them to memory. Amara at a gala, her smile tight and her eyes wary. Amara with Caldwell's hand gripping her arm just a little too tightly, the pain visible only in her eyes. Amara's smile in earlier photos from before the relationship, wide and genuine and free. Amara's smile in later photos, careful and measured, as if smiling too broadly might provoke consequences. Jean Ho's hands clenched on the pages, crumpling the expensive paper. There was a statement from Amara's former assistant, who'd been abruptly fired when she expressed concern about Caldwell's controlling behavior. There were reports from the doorman at Amara's former apartment building, documenting late-night arguments and Caldwell's tendency to appear unannounced and demand entry. And there, at the bottom of the file, was the most recent information. Darren Caldwell had been making inquiries about Amara's new husband. He'd been seen at an exclusive club 3 nights ago, drunk and indignant, telling anyone who would listen that no foreign gangster was going to keep what belonged to him. Jean Ho closed the file and sat in the darkness of his office. He thought about Amara upstairs, probably awake by now, probably wondering where he'd gone. She never asked him about his absences. She never demanded explanations or made scenes. She was independent and composed and brilliant. And that composure, he was beginning to understand, was armor she'd learned to wear to survive. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Dae-hyun," he said when his cousin answered. "I need you to arrange a meeting. Darren Caldwell. Today. Make it clear that attendance is not optional." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Should I tell him what it's about?" "Tell him," Jean Ho said softly, "that we need to discuss his future political aspirations." When Jean Ho returned to their bedroom, Amara was awake, sitting at her drafting table in the alcove by the window, working on designs for the community center she'd insisted be part of their legitimate business ventures. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was warm but guarded. "Good morning," she said. "I didn't hear you get up. I had some business to handle." He studied her face, looking for signs of her nightmare, but she'd tucked it away somewhere deep. "Did you sleep well?" Something flickered across her expression. "There and gone. Fine. Thank you. You were having a nightmare last night," he said directly. Amara had never responded well to him being anything less than straightforward. Her face went carefully neutral. "Was I? I don't remember. Don't, he said more sharply than he intended. He moderated his voice with effort. Don't lie to me, please. She looked down at the pencil in her hand, twirling it absently. It was one of her nervous habits, one of the many small things he'd come to notice and cherish. It was nothing, she said finally. Just a bad dream. Everyone has them. You whispered, please don't, in your sleep, with such fear in your voice that it woke me. The color drained from her face. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Then she stood up quickly, arranging her face into the polite mask she wore for business meetings. I should get dressed properly. I have a client meeting at 10. Amara. He caught her hand gently, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't look at him either. I know about Darren Caldwell. She went very, very still. What do you know? Everything. The isolation, the control, the threats, all of it. Shame flooded her expression, and she tried to pull her hand away. I see. I suppose your people did their research. Some of it. The rest I had done this morning. I understand if you want to. If this changes things. The arrangement we made. Changes things? He stared at her, genuinely confused. I should have told you before the wedding, she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other in a way so unlike her usual measured speech. I know damaged goods aren't exactly what you signed up for. I understand if you want to end the marriage. I won't make trouble. My father was insistent this was mutually beneficial, but I understand if... Stop. He stepped closer, still holding her hand. Listen to me carefully, Amara. The only thing that has changed is that I now understand why you sometimes look at me as if you're waiting for me to become someone else. And knowing that makes me want to burn the world down for you. She blinked, confusion replacing the shame in her eyes. I don't... You're not angry? I'm furious, he said softly. But not with you. Never with you. But I stayed, she whispered. For so long. Even when I knew it was destroying me. Even when my friends tried to warn me. I kept thinking I could fix it. That if I was just smarter or more accommodating or less ambitious, he'd stop trying to control everything about me. Nothing you did caused his behavior, Jinho said firmly. Nothing. She laughed, but it was a broken sound that tore at his heart. You don't understand. I let it happen. I'm not some helpless victim, Jinho. I'm educated. I'm successful. I had options. And I still let a man systematically dismantle my life piece by piece until I barely recognized myself. You didn't let anything happen, he said, struggling to keep his voice even. You survived something awful. There's no shame in that. Tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. Why are you being so understanding about this? Understanding. He almost laughed. Amara, I'm many things, but understanding isn't one of them. What I am is yours. That's what marriage means to me. Even if it started as an arrangement, you're mine and I protect what's mine. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. He brushed away her tears with his thumbs. And I'm going to make you a promise right now. You will never have another nightmare like the one you had last night. Never. Because the man who caused them is never going to hurt you or frighten you again. Jinho, what are you planning? Nothing for you to worry about. He kissed her forehead gently. Trust me. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face. Whatever she saw there made her shoulders relax slightly. I'm starting to, she admitted quietly. Good. He stepped back reluctantly. I have a meeting this afternoon. Business. But tonight I want to take you to dinner. Will you let me do that? You don't have to take me out, she said automatically. I know how busy you are. Amara. He waited until she met his eyes. I want to take my wife to dinner. Say yes. A small smile tugged at her lips, more genuine than any smile he'd seen from her in weeks. Yes. Good. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. The meeting was set for 3 o'clock at an abandoned warehouse Jinho's organization owned in the industrial district. Jinho arrived 20 minutes early, which meant he was already seated at the single metal table in the center of the cavernous space when Darren Caldwell was escorted in by Daehyun and 2 other men. Caldwell looked exactly like his photographs, tall, conventionally handsome in that bland way American businessmen often were, expensive suit and careful haircut, everything about him designed to project trustworthiness and success. Jin-ho hated him on sight. "What is this?" Caldwell demanded, looking around the empty warehouse with growing alarm. "I was told this was a meeting about potential political donors." "It is," Jin-ho said, not rising from his seat. "Sit down." "I don't think." "I didn't ask what you think," Jin-ho said, his voice dangerously soft. "I told you to sit down." Something in his tone made Caldwell obey before he thought about it. He sat across from Jin-ho, then seemed to realize he'd just followed an order and tried to regain his composure. "Look, I don't know what this is about, but I have connections in this city. People will be looking for me if I don't." "This is about Amara," Jin-ho interrupted. "My wife, your former fiancée." Caldwell's face went through a series of rapid changes. Surprise, anger, calculation, and finally a forced smile. "Ah, I see. Look, I'm sure Amara has told you all sorts of things, but you have to understand, she can be difficult, emotionally volatile. We had our problems, sure, but that's relationships, right? Nothing unusual." Jin-ho felt a wave of disgust so powerful it almost choked him. This man, this pathetic excuse for a human being, had terrorized Amara for months, had made one of the strongest women Jin-ho had ever known doubt herself, and now he sat here trying to paint her as unstable. "I've read the emails," Jin-ho said quietly. "I've seen the texts. I've spoken to her former assistant, her doorman, her friends. I know exactly what kind of man you are, Caldwell." The fake smile dropped from Caldwell's face, replaced by something uglier and more genuine. "You had no right to dig into my private business. Amara is my business now." Jin-ho leaned forward slightly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to forget she exists. You won't contact her. You won't speak about her. You won't appear anywhere she might be. If you see her at an event, you'll leave immediately. You will erase her from your life so completely that it will be as if you never met her." Caldwell gave a short, derisive laugh. "Or what? You'll have your goons rough me up? This is America, not whatever third world country you came from. We have laws here." Jin-ho didn't react to the racism. He'd heard worse, and from better men than this. "Laws," he repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, let's talk about laws. Harassment is against the law. So is making threats. So is financial coercion. I have documentation of all three." "You don't have shit," Caldwell spat, his composed facade crumbling completely. "And even if you did, who's going to believe you over me? You're a criminal. Everyone knows it, even if they can't prove it. I'm a respected businessman with friends in the DA's office. Which is why I won't be going to the authorities," Jin-ho said calmly. "I'll be going to the media. Every email, every text, every statement from witnesses, all of it released to every news outlet in the country. Your political aspirations will die before they begin. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your business partners will abandon you rather than be associated with a man who terrorizes women. Your life as you know it will be over." The color drained from Caldwell's face. "You wouldn't." "I would," Jin-ho assured him. "But that's not all. After your public destruction, after you've lost everything you value, then I'll turn my attention to making your private life a living hell. Every business deal you try to make will mysteriously fall through. Every relationship you attempt will end badly. Every opportunity that comes your way will vanish before you can reach it. You will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when the next blow will fall." "You can't do this," Caldwell said, but there was fear in his voice now. "You can't just." "I can," Jin-ho said simply. "I will. Unless you do exactly as I say and remove yourself from Amara's life completely." Caldwell stared at him, calculation visible in his eyes. "And if I agree, you'll keep quiet about all this supposed evidence. You have my word." "The word of a gangster," Caldwell said bitterly. Jin-ho smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You misunderstand me, Caldwell. I'm not threatening you because I'm a criminal. I'm threatening you because you hurt someone I love. If I were just a businessman, just a regular husband, I'd still find a way to destroy you for what you did to her." The only difference is that I have more resources to do it with. She's manipulating you, Caldwell tried desperately. Playing the victim. That's what she does. She seems so perfect at first, so together. But then she starts pushing, questioning everything, challenging you at every turn. Jin-ho moved faster than Caldwell could track, his hand closing around the other man's throat. Not squeezing, just holding. Promise. That's the last time you speak about her, he said softly. Are we clear? Caldwell nodded frantically. Jin-ho released him and stepped back, disgusted. You have two choices, Jin-ho said. Leave Amara alone and continue your life, diminished but intact. Or continue your obsession with her and lose everything. I don't care what you choose, but know this. If you ever cause her a moment's fear or pain again, there won't be a third warning. You'll simply disappear, and no one will ever find what's left of you. He turned and walked toward the exit, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Caldwell? The nightmares you gave my wife? She whispered, please don't, in her sleep last night. That's why you're still breathing right now instead of bleeding out on this concrete floor. I wanted to kill you the moment I heard those words. I still want to. But Amara deserves better than having your death on her conscience. So instead, you get mercy you don't deserve. Use it wisely. 7:00 that evening, Jin-ho waited in the foyer of their home, checking his watch. Amara? The reservation is at 7:30. Coming. Her voice carried down the stairs, a note of excitement in it he hadn't heard before. When she appeared at the top of the staircase, he forgot how to breathe for a moment. She wore a dress in deep crimson that hugged her curves before falling in a graceful sweep to the floor. Her hair swept up to showcase the elegant line of her neck and shoulders. She'd put on the diamond earrings he'd given her as a wedding present, the first gift she'd actually accepted from him without protest. Is it too much? She asked, hesitating at the top of the stairs. I wasn't sure what kind of restaurant. You're perfect, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Amara, you're absolutely perfect. She smiled, pleased and a little shy, as she descended the stairs. You look very handsome too, though you always do. He'd worn his best suit. The charcoal one she'd once mentioned brought out the warmth in his eyes, though he doubted she remembered saying it. He'd remembered, though. He remembered everything about her. The restaurant was Lumiere, the most exclusive place in the city. Jin-ho had invested heavily in it 2 years ago, which meant getting a table was never a problem. The owner, Sophia, greeted them personally, showing them to a private balcony overlooking the city lights. Jin-ho, Amara said softly as they sat down. This is too much. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he said simply. Let me spoil you tonight. Please. She bit her lip, then nodded. Okay. They talked through dinner, and it reminded him of their first midnight conversation in the kitchen, when neither of them could sleep and they'd ended up talking until dawn. Amara told him about her childhood in Chicago, her brilliant mother who'd taught architecture at Northwestern, her father's decision to enter consulting after a distinguished military career. She told him about her dreams of creating spaces that transformed communities, buildings that weren't just functional but healing. Jin-ho listened to every word, watching the animation return to her face as she talked about things that made her happy. He told her about growing up in Seoul, about his grandmother who'd insisted he learn traditional Korean poetry even as he was being groomed to take over the family business. He told her about his plans to shift more of the organization into legitimate enterprises, how he wanted to build something that could last generations without the constant shadow of violence. You'd be good at that, she said thoughtfully. You have vision and you understand people. I've watched how you interact with your team. They respect you. Most of them fear me, he corrected gently. Some of both, maybe, but fear alone doesn't create the kind of loyalty I've seen. You have people who've been with you for years, who would die for you without hesitation. That's not just fear. He reached across the table and took her hand. You see the best in people. Not in everyone, she said quietly. Not anymore. I used to think everyone had good in them if you just looked hard enough. But I've learned better. Amara, it's okay, she said quickly. I'm not who I used to be, but I'm learning to be okay with who I am now. And who's that? He asked softly. She thought about it, her fingers tightening around his. Someone stronger than I thought. Someone who survived. Someone who's learning not to apologize for taking up space in the world. Good, he said fiercely. Take up all the space you want. You belong here in my life, in my home. You're not a guest or an arrangement or a convenience. You're my wife and I. He stopped himself, unsure if she was ready to hear what he wanted to say. You what? She prompted, her dark eyes serious in the candlelight. I'm falling in love with you, he admitted. I know that wasn't part of our arrangement. I know this was supposed to be business, but I can't help it. Every day I fall a little more. The way you argue with me over breakfast. The way you've slowly been making the house into a home. The way you challenge me to be better, to do better. I'm in love with you, Amara, and I need you to know that. I don't expect you to feel the same way. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I needed you to know. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Jean Ho. You don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know. Whatever happens, whatever you decide about us, I want you to know that you're loved, you're safe, and you're cherished. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at their joined hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was so scared when my father first suggested this arrangement. I thought I was trading one controlling man for another. I thought marriage, any marriage, meant losing myself, meant being small and careful and always watching for warning signs. She looked up at him, and her eyes were fierce. But you've never made me feel small. You ask my opinion. You listen when I talk. You made sure I had my own bank account and insisted I keep control of my own money. You've never once raised your voice at me, even when I deliberately provoked you that first month to see what would happen. He stared at her, surprised. You were testing me. Of course I was, she said simply. After Darren, I had to know what would happen when things weren't perfect. And you just looked confused. You never got angry. You never threatened. You just asked me what was wrong and if there was anything you could do to help. Because that's the normal response when someone you care about is upset, he said, still processing the fact that she'd been deliberately pushing his buttons in those early weeks. Not for everyone, she said quietly. Not for Darren. But that's not the point. What matters is that you're not him. You're nothing like him. And I think I'm falling in love with you too. I didn't think I'd ever be able to trust anyone again. I didn't think I had it in me. But you make me feel safe enough to try. Jean Ho stood up and pulled her to her feet right there on the balcony with the city spread out below them. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and careful at first, then with growing heat as she responded, her arms winding around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Amara Park, he said, using her married name deliberately, watching the way her eyes softened at the sound. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you feel safe. I'm going to give you everything you ever dreamed of. I'm going to love you so well that you forget what it was like to be afraid. I'm holding you to that, she whispered. Good. Hold me to all of it. Expect everything from me. Demand everything. You deserve it all. They stayed on the balcony for a long time, holding each other as the city lights glittered below them. Eventually, Jean Ho's phone buzzed with a message from Daehyun. One word, done. Darren Caldwell had been seen booking a flight to London 3 hours ago. He'd withdrawn significant funds from his accounts and resigned from his position at the investment firm via email. By tomorrow, he'd be an ocean away from Amara. Jean Ho deleted the message and pulled his wife closer. Take me home, Amara said softly against his chest. Our home. Always, he promised. 3 months later, Jean Ho came home from a business meeting to find Amara in the kitchen with his grandmother, the two of them deep in conversation as they prepared a meal together. His grandmother was teaching her to make japchae, and Amara was paying careful attention, asking questions about the proper way to season the vegetables. Jean Hoya, his grandmother called when she spotted him. Come taste this and tell your wife how perfect her cooking is becoming. Amara rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. It's nowhere near perfect, Halmiani. I'm still learning. Jin-ho came over and dutifully tasted the noodle dish Amara offered him. Perfect, he declared, and was rewarded with her laugh. Liar, she accused fondly. But thank you for the ego boost. His grandmother watched them with satisfaction. You two are good for each other. I knew it from the start. Later that night, as they lay in bed together, Amara traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For everything. For being patient with me. For making me feel safe. She hesitated. For whatever you did to make Darren leave the country. Jin-ho tensed slightly. Amara, I'm not asking for details, she said quickly. I want you to know that I'm grateful. I spent 18 months being afraid of him. And then suddenly he was just gone. And I could breathe again. He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. I'd do anything for you. Anything. I know, she whispered. That's why I love you. They were words she'd said before, but each time felt like a gift. Each time felt like watching someone who'd been lost find their way home. I love you too, he said. My brilliant, brave, beautiful wife. I love you too. Outside, the city continued its endless movement, indifferent to the small, perfect moment happening in the bedroom of Jin-ho Park's mansion. Indifferent to the way two people who'd been wounded in different ways had found healing in each other. Amara fell asleep in Jin-ho's arms, peaceful and safe, and Jin-ho stayed awake a little longer, watching over her, keeping the promise he'd made at 4 in the morning in his office. She would never have another nightmare. He'd tear apart anyone who tried to hurt her. But for now, holding her close while she slept without fear, he'd already won the only battle that mattered. 5 months into their marriage, Amara was sitting in her office in the downtown building Jin-ho had purchased for her design firm when her assistant knocked on the door. Mrs. Park, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent. Something in her assistant's tone made Amara look up sharply. Who is it, Melissa? He says his name is Darren Caldwell. The world seemed to tilt sideways for a moment. The name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in months crashed into her consciousness like a wrecking ball. Darren. Here. After everything. Mrs. Park? Are you okay? Should I call security? Amara took a deep breath, steadying herself. The fear was there. A cold knot in her stomach. But alongside it was something else. Anger. White-hot and clarifying. No, she said, standing up. No, I'll see him. Darren looked different than she remembered. Thinner, less polished, his once perfect suit slightly rumpled. His eyes holding a desperate edge she recognized all too well. He'd once made her feel small and insignificant with just a look. Now he just looked pathetic. Amara, he said, and his voice was pleading. Amara, please, I just need 5 minutes. She crossed her arms, staying behind her desk, maintaining the physical barrier between them. Why are you here, Darren? You were supposed to stay away. I tried, he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I went to London. I started over, but everything fell apart. Every business deal, every opportunity, it all collapsed. He did something. Your husband. He's still ruining my life from across an ocean. Jin-ho had nothing to do with your failures, Amara said coldly, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. You ruined your own life when you decided to be a monster instead of a decent human being. I made mistakes, Darren admitted, his voice rising. I know I did. I was controlling and manipulative and sometimes cruel. But what he's doing is worse. He's systematically destroying everything I try to build. I can't get a job. I can't keep an apartment. I'm running out of money. Please, Amara, if you ever cared about me at all. I need to stop you right there, Amara said, and her voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her body. I don't owe you anything. Not compassion, not help, not a single moment of my time. You spent our entire relationship trying to break me down into someone small enough for you to control. You isolated me from my friends. You criticized my work until I doubted everything I created. You made me afraid to speak my mind in my own home. I'm sorry, he said, and maybe he even meant it. I'm so sorry, Amara. I've been in therapy. I understand now why I did those things. My father. Don't you dare blame your father for your choices. She cut him off. We all have damage, Darren. We all have pain. The difference is that some of us choose not to inflict our pain on others. He took a step closer to her desk, his eyes wild. Just talk to him for me. Ask him to call off whatever he's doing. Tell him I've learned my lesson. Tell him I'll never bother you again. You're bothering me right now, she pointed out. And I need you to leave. This conversation is over. Something shifted in Darren's expression. The desperation bled away, replaced by a flash of the cold rage she remembered all too well from their time together. You think you're so much better than me now, he snarled, his handsome face twisting. Playing at being some gangster's wife. Do you have any idea what he really is? The things he's done? He's a killer, Amara. Criminal. And you're just his latest acquisition. You don't know anything about my husband, Amara said, her hand reaching for the panic button Jinho had insisted be installed under her desk. And you don't know anything about me anymore. I know you're still the same weak, pathetic woman who stayed with me for 18 months because you were too afraid to leave, Darren sneered. I know you're still. That's enough. Jinho's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him, Melissa looked terrified but determined, clearly the one who'd called him. Darren spun around, his face draining of color. I wasn't. I was just. You were just leaving, Jinho said softly, dangerously. Now. For a moment no one moved. Then Darren straightened his shoulders, a last desperate attempt at dignity. This isn't over, he said to Amara. You can't hide behind him forever. She's not hiding, Jinho said, his voice still deadly quiet. She's standing right there, facing you down. You're the one who needs to hide, Mr. Caldwell. Because you've just made the worst mistake of your miserable life. Darren pushed past him and fled, nearly running down the hallway toward the elevators. Jinho watched him go, then turned to Amara, his face immediately softening with concern. Are you all right? Amara realized she was shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was the aftermath of adrenaline, of standing her ground, of finally saying the things she'd wanted to say for so long. I'm okay, she said, and was surprised to find it was true. I'm actually okay. Jinho crossed to her, searching her face. You're shaking. I told him to leave, she said, a note of wonder in her voice. I stood up to him. I didn't freeze or try to placate him or make myself small. I told him exactly what I thought. Pride flickered across Jinho's face. Yes, you did. You were magnificent. Jinho said something in Korean to Daehyun, who'd appeared silently in the doorway, then turned back to Amara. I'm having the security team escort Caldwell from the building and make sure he leaves the premises. He won't come near you again. How did you know? Amara asked, grasping his hand. Melissa called me the moment he gave his name at reception. Smart woman. I've been on my way here since before he entered your office. Thank you, Amara said, squeezing his hand. Not for coming to my rescue, though I appreciate that too. Thank you for making sure I had people around me who would call you, for the panic button, for all the safety measures that meant I could stand up to him without being afraid. Jinho brushed his fingers against her cheek. You're the strongest person I know, Amara Park. All I did was make sure you had the backup to let that strength shine. He held her close until her shaking stopped, until she felt solid and grounded again. And as she stood in the circle of his arms, Amara realized something profound had changed inside her. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long, the vigilance, the careful monitoring of her own behavior to avoid provoking anger. It was gone. In its place was something new and bright and fierce, something that felt like freedom. That evening, after statements had been given to the police about Darren's trespassing, after the security team had confirmed he'd checked out of his hotel and boarded a flight back to London, after Jinho's grandmother had force-fed them both dinner and fretted over Amara's pale face, Amara and Jinho sat together in his study. Their study, she corrected herself mentally. Their home. I need to tell you something, Amara said. Jinho looked up from the reports he'd been reviewing, giving her his full attention. What is it? When Darren showed up today, I was scared, she admitted. For about 10 seconds. But then I was just angry. For the first time, I wasn't paralyzed by fear. I was furious that he thought he could still control me, that he thought he had any right to my time or attention. That's good, Jinho said. Anger is healthy. Anger means you know you deserved better. I did deserve better, she said firmly. I do deserve better. And I have better. I have you. She stood up and crossed to him, settling herself on his lap. He wrapped his arms around her automatically, his face nuzzling into her neck. Marry me again, he said suddenly. She pulled back to look at him. What? I know we're already married, he said. But that was business. A transaction. I want to marry you again. For real this time. With a ceremony that blends Korean and West African traditions. With vows we actually mean. With you looking radiant and me trying not to embarrass myself by crying at the altar. You'd cry? She teased gently. I'd absolutely cry, he said seriously. Watching you walk toward me. Choosing me. Promising to spend your life with me? Amara, I'd be a mess. Her eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you again. 100 times if you want. Once more is fine, she said, smiling. But I want to do it right. I want to stand in front of everyone we care about and tell the world that you're mine and I'm yours. I want your grandmother to weep happy tears and Daehyun to look uncomfortable in formal clothes. I want our wedding photos on every wall of this house. I want everything, Jinho. With you, I want everything. Then let's have everything, he said, kissing her softly. Let's have the wedding and the photos and the life we both deserve. Let's have it all. 3 months later, Amara stood in front of a mirror, looking at herself in her wedding dress. It was a masterpiece of design, combining traditional Korean elements with West African influences, just like the ceremony they had planned. The red and gold embroidery caught the light as she turned, and she felt beautiful in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Her father knocked on the door. Amara, are you ready? Almost, she said. Come in. Marcus Wilson had been skeptical of the arranged marriage at first, worried that he was trading his daughter from one dangerous situation to another. But he'd seen how Jinho treated Amara, how she'd flourished over the past 8 months, and his concerns had faded. You look stunning, sweetheart, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Thanks, Dad. She turned to face him. Thank you for suggesting this arrangement. I know it was a risk, but you gave me a chance at a new life. Jinho gave you that, her father said. I just made the introduction. What he's done for you, how he's protected you and loved you, that's all him. And me, Amara said firmly. I did some of the work too. I chose to heal. I chose to trust him. I chose to love him back. Her father smiled. Yes, you did. And I'm proud of you for all of it. The ceremony was held in the garden of their home, which Amara had redesigned herself, blending architectural elements from Korea and West Africa into a space that reflected both their heritages. Jinho's grandmother sat in the front row, already dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. Daehyun stood as Jinho's best man, looking remarkably dignified despite his obvious discomfort in formal clothes. And Jinho waited at the altar, watching Amara approach with such naked adoration on his face that several guests were visibly moved. When she reached him, when her father placed her hand in Jinho's, she felt a sense of completeness she'd never experienced before. Hi, Jinho said softly. Hi, she said back, smiling. The officiant began the ceremony, which included elements from both their cultural traditions, but Amara barely heard the words. She was too focused on Jinho's face, on the love and devotion written clearly in every line of it. When it came time for the vows, Jinho spoke first. Amara, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the garden. The first time we got married, I promised you protection and partnership. Today, I promise you everything else. I promise to love you on your good days and your bad days. I promise to hold you when you need strength and step back when you need to stand on your own. I promise to be your safe harbor always. I promise to choose you every single day for the rest of my life. You've made me a better man, and I'm going to spend forever trying to be worthy of your love. Amara's hands were shaking slightly as she spoke her own vows. Jinho, you gave me back myself. You made me remember what it felt like to be loved without fear, to exist without constantly watching for danger, to take up space in the world unapologetically. You've been patient with my healing and celebrated every step forward. You've protected me without making me feel weak and loved me without asking me to be anything other than myself. I promise to love you with everything I am. I promise to be your partner in all things. I promise to build a life with you that honors both our pasts while creating a new future together. You're my home, Jinho Park, and I choose you today and always. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife again, Jinho pulled Amara close and kissed her like he'd been waiting his entire life to do it. The gathered guests cheered and applauded, but Amara barely heard them. She was too busy kissing her husband, her love, her future. Later at the reception, Jinho stood to make a toast. The room fell silent as he looked at Amara, sitting beside him in her beautiful dress, her face glowing with happiness. I'm not good at speeches, Jinho began, and several people chuckled because everyone knew Jinho Park could command a room without effort. But I need to say something about my wife. 8 months ago, Amara walked into my life as part of a business arrangement. She was wary and wounded and trying so hard to be strong. And I thought I was doing her a favor, giving her protection and a fresh start. But the truth is, she saved me. She took this house that was just a building and made it a home. She took my life that was just power and business and strategy and gave it meaning. She showed me what it means to be loved. Really loved. Not for what I can do or who I am in the world, but just for being me. He turned to look directly at Amara, his eyes suspiciously bright. Amara, you're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you chose me. He raised his glass. To my wife, my partner, my everything. To Amara. To Amara, the guests chorused, raising their own glasses. Amara stood up and kissed him, not caring that everyone was watching, and the room erupted in applause again. That night, as they lay in bed in the house that was truly theirs now, Amara traced patterns on Jinho's chest like she'd done 100 times before. Happy? Jinho asked softly. So happy, Amara said. I didn't think I could ever be this happy. There were years when I thought happiness was just something that happened to other people. But here I am. Here you are, Jinho agreed, pulling her closer. And here you'll stay. Always. Always, Amara echoed. She fell asleep in his arms, peaceful and safe, with no nightmares chasing her into the darkness. And Jinho stayed awake for a while, watching over her, keeping the promise he'd made at 4 in the morning 8 months ago. She would never be afraid again. He'd made sure of it. And together, they'd built something neither of them had expected, but both of them deserved. A love story that had started as a business arrangement and become the greatest adventure of their lives. And as Jinho finally drifted off to sleep, Amara stirred and whispered against his chest, completing the sentence that had haunted him all those months ago. Please don't ever leave me. Never, he promised, though he wasn't sure if she was awake enough to hear him. Not in this lifetime or any other. It didn't matter. She knew. They both did. Some promises didn't need to be spoken to be kept.